Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. The Department for International Trade and International Development has announced an additional £2.5 million of UK aid funding for the Commonwealth Standards Network CSN programme. The CSN works to increase the use of international standards across the Commonwealth in order to promote inclusive intra-Commonwealth trade. The additional funding will help the CSN continue its valuable work to break down non-tariff barriers to trade and support institutions and exporters in developing countries to use standards so they can access new markets and attract investment. The UK will discuss with its Commonwealth partners the importance of promoting an open, fair, and inclusive global rules-based system with the World Trade Organization, WTO, at its heart, and underline the importance of fighting protectionism. The International Development Secretary, Alok Sharma, said in a quote, "UK aid is vital in reducing barriers to trade and investment across the Commonwealth," end quote. The UK has also signed a new trade continuity agreement with the Southern African Customs Union and Mozambique, SACUM. This trade continuity agreement will see British businesses and consumers benefiting from continued trade with SACUM after the UK leaves the European Union. So I think this is a really great overture towards Africa, as they have put it, their oldest allies. As I will put it, their former colonies. I guess they can't use that kind of language now. But life does have to continue after Brexit. And I think it's a really great investment to bring all our exports to international standards so we don't continue with those awful reports of how, well, I know about Nigeria's exports are rejected internationally. Exactly. But I do hope that there's a West African version of this SACUM agreement, because right now countries like Mozambique, Lesotho, and what have you, they import their goods to the UK tariff-free. South Africa, 96% tariff-free, 96% of their goods. I really hope that's replicated for West Africa.
Well, you're right. This is part of the preparation for, life after Brexit. The Boris Johnson administration has adopted a number of strategies. The Foreign Secretary, the International Trade Secretary, they've been targeting countries in Latin America and also some countries in Asia. Because once the United Kingdom pulls out of Brexit, then it will be bound by WTO rules. It will be back to WTO, the World Trade Organization, and it will have to abide by global rules guiding trade. And in that regard, it is open to new trade partnerships or renegotiation of partnerships with other blocs, either in Asia or in Africa. So on October 9, as part of this, the UK signed, Britain signed a memorandum of understanding, awaiting further ratification with, South Africa, Angola, Eswatini, Namibia, countries under the South African Customs Union, plus Mozambique. And the whole idea is that Britain would not pay tariffs, on goods exported, imported from those countries into Britain. At the time, we had raised the question of, whether or not this should not be done in other regions of Africa. But what is now happening is that at this ongoing Commonwealth meeting of trade ministers of the Commonwealth, at the meeting, Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, had come up with this proposal about partnership rather than protectionism, about support, about inclusivity within the Commonwealth. And of course, the Commonwealth has a total of 53 countries, so that's a lot. And already, Britain is a trading partner with virtually all of these countries, a total of 2.4 billion people in terms of population. So that's a big market. In the last year alone, the trade, between Britain and these 53 countries was about 100 billion pounds. And the projection is that, of course, in terms of dollar, by next year, this will be almost about $700 billion. So there is great potential there. However, it's Britain's interest that, Liz Truss and Alok Sharma will talk about. The question is, what is the capacity, particularly of the African countries within the Commonwealth? There are 17 African countries that are part of the Commonwealth. And the whole issue in the face of Brexit in relation to Africa is not just trade. there are other issues. Aid. What happens to aid? You know, how are we going to negotiate that to make sure that even in the event of recession, immediate recession after Brexit, that these African countries can be protected? 2, foreign direct investment. If there is recession in the UK, we are likely to have a drop in recession. 3, agriculture. Once the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, now we can now negotiate independently with either Britain or the other partners in terms of agricultural policy, because the European Union, of which Britain is still a part, the UK is still a part, has an unfavorable agricultural policy, what they call the common agricultural policy, which does not favor people in countries in Africa, particularly Tanzania, which has refused to sign the EPA with the East African Community, and also Kenya, which exports, the bulk of its flowers to the United Kingdom. So these African countries will need to, come together, I think, as a bloc, as the South African Customs Union has negotiated with the UK, to come together as a bloc so that they can leverage, their collective interest, in dealing with the United Kingdom post-Brexit.
Absolutely.
So these, in my view, are some of the issues.
I think that is the only way the relationship can work. If African countries do come together and do leverage on how they can kind of put themselves ahead and take advantage of this pretty messy situation. But this is a very welcoming trade idea that's come forward, and I do hope that it's executed in the right way. And like you said, Tunde, as well, we have to find a way to ensure that we can also what's the word I'm looking for? We can also get rid of quite a lot of tariffs that are placed on us on the western side of Africa. I think that's the only way in which any sorts of benefits can come out of this agreement that's not just in favor of the UK.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. You made me smile there when you referred to the agricultural issues. It was such a huge topic during the Brexit campaign about how Europe cannot tell us the shape of our bananas. It was like a huge thing. So, yeah, so it's going to be open to us now. Yeah, great. Now, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, I beg your pardon, IMF, is calling for urgent structural reforms to fast-track Nigeria's economic recovery. The Bretton Woods institution's advocacy coincided with President Muhammadu Buhari's faulting of statistics produced on Nigeria by the two foreign bodies, describing them as wild estimates. He therefore tasked members of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, which he inaugurated on Wednesday, to develop local contents database and make accurate economic data gathering its prime focus. Some economists have, however, expressed support for the call by the IMF for structural reforms in the country. For me, the biggest plus from that IMF report was the emphasis on gender equality, that there needs to be equal access for women and girls to opportunities for economic advancement. Yeah. But it was also interesting that they sort of okayed the VAT increase. A lot of us have been moaning about. They think that's a great idea.
Capitalist
yes, yeah, exactly. Which we're not surprised by that because the whole idea is to boost revenue, but at what cost?
Honestly. Yes, I think the IMF also supported the tight monetary policies being adopted by the CBN of the Central Bank of Nigeria. You are right. The point that was made about how to expand the revenue base, how to diversify the revenue base, even if many Nigerians do not think an increase in the value-added tax, is in the best interest of the ordinary man. But I think, the resistance to what the IMF says in their end-of-term report that was given by the representative in Nigeria, and what the World Bank says in the Africa Pulse, which is their biannual assessment of 3 major economies in Africa: Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa. I don't think the resistance makes sense, because if you look at it in terms of what they are saying, they're saying that economic growth in Nigeria particularly is sluggish. The non-oil sector is also sluggish. Inflation may have come down as a result of a drop in food inflation, but by 2020, inflation is likely to go up again. So, and they're saying we need to manage the vulnerabilities within the Nigerian economy. And I do not think that this is that's rocket science. But maybe we'll go on break. When we return, we'll continue with the analysis. Absolutely. We'll take a short commercial break now. We'll be right back. You're watching The Morning Show. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. We're still taking a look at the headlines. And Tunde and Leila, before we went on break, I was commenting on the report by the IMF and World Bank. and that there is nothing that they have said there that is strange, that is not already known to the Nigerian authorities, both on the monetary side and the fiscal side. But the challenge we usually have is that, we tend to express doubts officially about statements from IMF and the World Bank. And I think that, in this particular case, we should take an interest in, what the IMF has said, what the World Bank has said. And it's just as well that this is coming at a time when the president has more or less inaugurated the Economic Advisory Council. And when he met with that Economic Advisory Council yesterday, the president made it very clear that he expects a lot from them. And maybe this report by the IMF and the World Bank could be a starting point for them to study the reports and see how they can offer, necessary advice to the relevant MDAs, which the president has promised will work with this Economic Advisory Council. Then the president, of course, raised a point yesterday when he was meeting with the Economic Advisory Council about, data from Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, and how that cannot be trusted, and how we need to find homegrown solutions, that, in his words, are suitable and sustainable as a way of, fast-tracking Nigeria's economic growth and recovery. Now, the truth of the matter is that, yes, there may be homegrown solutions, but there are also specific indicators, and we are, of course, part of a global community. He also made a point about the importance of data. And I think in that regard, the president cannot be more correct. We have the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, but oftentimes there's always conflict in terms of data, either with relation to population or to economic growth or to inflation. You'll find all kinds of conflicting data. Maybe now with this Economic Advisory Council in place, we'll be able to move beyond the crisis of planning without data, which in itself, could be a disincentive for the sustainable development and growth that the president is looking for.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. The Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, the National Bureau of Statistics, is supposed to be a body for all of this. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, what we have is a situation where half of the data that comes out of the NBS is either not credible, is either knocked off as not true, and we don't have the strength in that institution that we should. But it takes me back to when Bill and Melinda Gates even wanted to try and start to get rid of polio worldwide, which they've now nearly achieved with only 30 cases left. And Nigeria was one of their starting points for obvious reasons. And in a recent Netflix documentary on Bill Gates, he literally stated that I could not trust the data that I was being given because it didn't add up to the statistics. He had to bring in his own software that used heat sensors around Nigeria to place how many people in Nigeria had polio. And that's how they were able to create their model in order to get rid of it. So it's one thing for the government to continue to knock off international statistics that, quite frankly, even if skewed or flawed, are giving us more accurate data than we're getting from our own National Bureau of Statistics. It's time for them to look at revamping the NBS. It's time for them to look at how they can put the NBS and the PAEC together to come up with proper data for Nigeria if they want to debunk claims that are coming out of Bretton Woods institutions. Because at the end of the day, there are cases to show that we are not getting the right data, such as when Bill and Melinda tried to get rid of polio in Nigeria.
Well, I wouldn't just dismiss the National Bureau of Statistics like that. I think that NBS, has been doing a lot of quality work, and the gentleman who has been reappointed as the Director General, I think his name is Yemi Kale. Yeah. He has shown a lot of independent-mindedness, and professionalism. But the problem, of course, is that you have the NBS, then you also have other agencies of government, the Federal Ministry of Statistics, and all kinds of agencies also coming up with their own kind of data that may not necessarily agree with, what the Bureau of Statistics is publishing.
But that's my point.
So what we need is some kind of clearinghouse, some synergy, some collaboration, so that a country like Nigeria can have a body of data, that everybody can use and consider reliable.
I didn't hear a dismissal. You said there should be strength.
Exactly.
Yeah, she had said that, some of the data from the NBS are incorrect.
Because they're not putting enough...
But also, talking about Bill and Melinda Gates, regarding their work on financial inclusion as well, some of their data contradicts the federal government's data, especially with regards to population in Nigeria. That you mentioned that we don't even know, we don't have a proper census that we can trust. It's all politicized. Let's start there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope we'll be able to have a proper census. You're right.
Still in Nigeria, as part of the last-minute efforts to avert industrial action by the organized labor, the Minister of Labor and Employment, Senator Chris Ngige, on Wednesday met with members of the Joint National Public Service Negotiating Council, JNPSNC, including the leadership of Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, and Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, to break the stalemate over the consequential adjustment of the new national minimum wage. The meeting, which lasted for over 2 hours, resolved that Labour and the government should hold separate meetings to sort out all outstanding disagreements before a high-level conclusive meeting to wrap up all discussions on October 15th. However, despite yesterday's meeting, the Association of Senior Civil Servants of Nigeria has started mobilizing for strike, saying the partial implementation of minimum wage for levels 1 to 6 officers is a divide-and-rule system that would be vehemently opposed by Labour. I agree with that, actually. It is coming across as divide and rule. Yeah. It is.
Well, I hope that by now the Minister of Labour and Productivity, Dr. Chris Ngige, will have been able to reconstitute or put together the federal government's negotiating team. You know that over a week ago, he had said, the federal government will need to constitute another team. But from the reports yesterday, he was at that meeting with organized labor. The Minister of Finance was there. Some other, very senior members of the government attended that meeting. If that is the negotiating team, then maybe, you will need to have some clarity on it. But definitely, Labour now is rallying around, the federal government is rallying around, to meet with Labour, because you recall that Labour had served notice that it will go on strike by October 16, if there is no, progress made in terms of, the terms of agreement over consequential adjustment. Now, a meeting has been fixed for October 15. Let us just hope that progress will be made at that October 15 meeting, and that this agreement over levels 7 to 17, what percentage of adjustment should be, provided, that matter will be resolved. Otherwise, the Minister of Labour, who had complained that if Labour were to have its way, Nigeria would be slammed with a bill of about 580 billion, and that, the Nigerian government cannot afford that, and that the government cannot afford to pay it. Now, you should also be thinking in terms of the cost of what an industrial crisis at this point could be, at a time when, the president is talking about, working hard to get the economy moving and to ensure faster economic recovery.
Absolutely.
I hope they do count the costs before taking a decision.
Yeah, honestly.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Kurd-held area in Syria has led to a near immediate result. Turkey launched a military operation against America's Kurdish partners in the fight against Islamic State. U.S. officials say it wasn't supposed to end that way. In remarks in the Roosevelt Room yesterday, Trump defended his decision, saying he campaigned on ending the endless wars, end of quote. In response to a reporter's question about Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan trying to wipe out the Kurds, Trump threatened to retaliate by wiping out Turkey's economy.
We have no soldiers in the area. We've been talking to Turkey for 3 years. They've been wanting to do this for many years, as you know. They've been fighting each other for centuries. They've been fighting each other for hundreds of years. This has been going on. We were put into this battle, interjected. It was supposed to be a 30-day period, and we've been there for many, many years. And it's time to get out. We're speaking to both sides. We've told President Erdogan how we feel. But we are speaking to both sides, and we're seeing what can be made out of a situation. But we have no soldiers in the area. We're getting out of the endless wars. We have to do it. And eventually somebody was going to have to make the decision. And frankly, we're getting a lot of praise from that decision. People are saying, gotta sometime bring our people back home. We're really serving, and we were serving as a police force. We had defeated ISIS. We defeated the Caliphate 100%. Erdogan and the existing groups of people, including Kurds, but you have the PKK, which is a natural enemy with Turkey, and likewise and opposite. They've been fighting again for many, many years. Their bitter enemies have been always, probably, possibly, always will be. So we are out of there. We've been out of there for a while. No soldiers whatsoever. We are taking some.
President Trump has been criticized even by his own Republican Party for this move, which is perceived as leaving the Kurds, which were U.S. allies, in the lurch. And it's most unfortunate. He's exposed them to Erdogan's aggression. And also he's claiming that ISIS has been defeated, but not quite. The worry is that the Kurds are the ones guarding arrested ISIS members. And if they're released, if they escape, some kind of prison break happens, that cycle of terror that the world had never seen before, to use Trump's language, it will start again. And I find it really crass that he felt the need to say it's not as if they helped us in Normandy. What a horrible, nasty thing to say, harkening back to World War II. Coming from a draft dodger like himself, who claimed he had bone spurs, did he help his own country in any military incursions? And it's really sad. And America has now, in recognition of this obvious fact, they have taken two of the Beatles, as they were called, two of the ISIS members, the UK ISIS members, very high profile, who were beheading foreigners. They've taken them into custody in America so that they do not escape, because it's obvious that ISIS members can now escape and regroup.
Well, it is a fact that, you know, the United States has already withdrawn its troops, about 1,000 troops from that region. And President Trump himself has provided the justification. For him, it's a campaign issue. It's an America first issue. You know, and he said this in the 2016 election. And now ahead of the elections in 2020, he's saying that America cannot afford to engage in stupid wars or prolonged wars, particularly in the Middle East. He has said it himself. And you are right to say that he's been criticized by Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican particularly, and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who think that this is a betrayal of the courts. And you know the courts, they've suffered a lot of persecution, a lot of discrimination. They are a minority, you know, in that region. But Turkey insists that, you know, the social democratic forces, the Kurdish group that had been an ally of the U.S. in that region, he insists that they are a terrorist organization and that it has legitimate security concerns. But we should go with the position of NATO, you know, that there should be restraint and there should be no escalation of the crisis in that region. Of course, France, UK, and Germany are opposed, and the United Nations Security Council will address the matter today.
Thank you, Dr. Bati.